From the Sunshine State, this is Tampa Bay's 10 Talk.
It's time for FLA Law, brought to you by the personal injury attorneys of Perenich, Caulfield, Avril, and Noyes. This hour will be informative, along with taking your questions and comments. Now, here are your hosts for today's show.
That's right. We are back live with FLA Law, live on the radio. Thank you all for joining us. As you know, we come to you every Tuesday at 5 o'clock with your live legal talk show. So thank you for joining us. Hopefully you are a faithful listener. If not, this is your first time, let everyone you know that FLA Law Live is on the radio. And we are here with two legal attorneys, legal minds, I would say, that are here to answer legal questions live on the air. As the intro said, we are the attorneys of Perenich, Caulfield, Avril, and Noyes, personal injury lawyers locally here to Clearwater, but we serve clients all over the state of Florida in various kinds of personal injury matters. And so that is the topic of discussion for tonight. Periodically, we do have guests that will appear on the show discussing different areas of law. So I do encourage you to tune in every Tuesday at 5 to engage in the conversation, to hear what we are going to be discussing. And of course, you can comment, call in, and get your questions answered live over the air. With that being said, before I jump into introducing who I have with me tonight as my co-host, I want to give you all the details so you know how you can tune in tonight. Hopefully you are in your car, you're driving home, you can stay listening for the whole hour. But if not, if you have to jump out and you want to continue to listen to the show, there's a couple ways you can do that. We have our show streaming live right now on Facebook, which can be found on our firm's Facebook page, which is Perenich, Caulfield, Avril, and Noyes Injury Lawyers. So if you want to catch the live stream, you want to see us actually in action, we're live in the studio right now. You can do that through Facebook and then also through YouTube. So if you don't have a Facebook account and you would like to watch the show live, comment, ask questions, you can do that on YouTube as well. Our YouTube page, of course, under the same name, our law firm, which is Perenich, Caulfield, Avril, and Noyes Injury Lawyers. You should see like a red circle around our page that'll let you know that we are live. Please like it, share it, let your family, friends, and everyone you know see that we're live. So that way, if they have a question, maybe you don't, but maybe someone else you know does, they can ask their question in the comment section as well. Get that answered live over the air. Now, the best way, though, to have your question answered this evening is through calling in. And we do have our lines open already. The phone number is 727-441-3000. If you'd like to call into the studio tonight, you can certainly do so. The lines are open, and me and my co-hosts are here tonight to answer your questions. And so with that being said, that's a nice segue into introducing who I have with me tonight, special guest and frequent co-host, Lori Robinson. Hi, Lori.
Hi, it's always great to be here.
Absolutely. I know it's been a little while. I don't know. Have you been back to the show since you returned from your trip?
I don't believe I have.
Oh,
actually.
Good. We were talking off the air. She just had a wonderful trip to Paris. So
yes, it was really fantastic.
I certainly will aspire to one day travel there. So that was great. And so hopefully you have missed her because she's back and she's here to answer questions all about personal injury this evening. In case you don't remember, she is one of our board certified civil trial lawyers at our firm at Perenich, Caulfield, Avril, and Noyes. And so you do have a wealth of knowledge on various personal injury topics that will be on the table for discussion tonight. And so the theme of our show this evening is essentially, what do I do when? Those are the kinds of questions we're going to be answering for you. Because at the end of the day, we understand that we do this day in and day out. And a lot of the things that we talk about, we just kind of get into a rhythm of just knowing and discussing. But there's still a good amount of people in our community who just don't understand a lot of the situations and nuances that can come about when you get hurt in a car accident, or you have a slip and fall type of an injury, or there's some sort of medical negligence. And a lot of the things that we're going to get into tonight are things I frequently talk about. These are questions that I answer on a regular basis, conversations that I have with clients or even potential clients weekly, and
Sure.
so these are the kind of things that I think are great for our listeners to really understand, so that they know, and they kind of have a leg up once they're getting into something like this, because it can be very disconcerting, after
Right.
you've had an injury, and just having this information under your belt can make all the difference. So with that being said, what do I do when? I think it's good to start with car accidents. Especially with the weather we've been having lately.
Unfortunately, way too prevalent to have
Very
an
much
accident.
so. We have wet roads and traffic, and school is back in. And so there's a little bit more traffic on the roadways. We've got school buses, children that are running to the bus stop. And you can imagine, if you're on any of the roadways in the Tampa Bay area, then you have seen an accident, over these past couple days, just because the rain can increase that. And so car accidents, they happen. And sadly, they happen more frequently when under certain conditions that we're experiencing right now when it comes to our weather.
Yeah, it's always amazed me, but probably because of the type of work I've done for so many years, that people drive exactly the same, maybe even faster in the rain.
Oh my goodness. That's so funny that you mentioned that, because the other day I was like, just driving, I think, at what it was a normal speed, a little under the speed limit. You have to adjust when the roads are wet. And someone just came flying by, and they were flying up to a red light.
Right.
Where
Hello?
Where are you going?
Yeah.
And you don't really have the ability to stop the way you normally would when the roads are slick like that. So it was funny that you mentioned that, because I was just thinking that the other day. I'm like, where are you going, and why are you driving so fast?
And how many times, the problem of hydroplaning, where it's a much different problem to drive without losing control. And you could be doing something that you would normally do. And that's what I'm saying. It's like, I noticed, because we know how easy it is for there to be an accident.
Absolutely.
So it just amazes me that I've never observed I have never personally observed any adjustment. I make an adjustment because I know it's like, it's bad enough when the roads are dry, but boy, when they're wet.
Oh yeah.
Now, then you do have the other thing. It's like I was driving to on 19, and I guess it was Saturday when they had torrential monsoon, and I was on 19, and I had a very important destination. It was my hair appointment for the important one.
Very important.
And we'll let the women in the audience, they know what that means.
Yes.
But so, and I'm on 19, and I'm thinking, I can hardly see.
Yes.
And this is bad enough that I'm going to have to think about.
Yes. Yeah.
And I don't want to miss this, but I was really thinking, I'm going to pull over and just, maybe I should just wait it out, or even cancel the appointment. And my hairdresser's in Oldsmar. But but as I got off off 19, thank goodness it was clearing up the way I was going, so that was okay. But it was really right on that edge.
As well with the hair salon.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's definitely something I think that also people start to slow down. They put on their hazards. They drive in erratic ways. People can always predict what the other car is doing. So there's just so many dynamics.
You really got to be you've got the total defensive driving mode.
Absolutely.
You should always, but especially when the conditions are like that.
Right. So let's get into what do I do when, since we're talking about car accidents and how they're so prevalent, especially right now, and we want people to be prepared. Just go over a couple little tips when it comes to this. So one of the ones that I think comes up quite often, but people don't even think to call an attorney because of this, because they say, what do I do when I'm in a car accident? It doesn't seem that serious at first. What would you say to that, Lori?
Yeah, that's a very common reaction that because obviously we always hope that it's not going to be a big problem.
Exactly. Sure.
And many times we're mostly focused on the damage to our car, and hoping that
They're looking at their baby.
Right, exactly. And it's a hassle and all that. So one of the most important things that you can do when you've actually been in an accident, even if you think that it's not a big deal, basically, that you're more worried about the property damage, the way that our bodies function is it's very common to experience some level of increased pain over the course of a few days. And so even if you don't perceive a particularly big issue at the moment, that doesn't mean you won't have a significant issue. And so it's very important actually to get to the doctor, to be evaluated, so that you can get a little input on that. And, obviously the best case scenario, if it doesn't develop and progress to a more significant problem, great. That's great. But if
that's best case, of course. Yeah.
But it is important both for your care, but also because of the way our law is structured. Everybody's required to have the personal injury protection insurance, the auto insurance that pays for your bills up to a certain amount. But in order to have the benefit of that coverage, you've got to have gone to the doctor within 14 days of the accident.
Exactly right.
Yeah. So it's very easy. I was guilty of it myself, where I had a, fortunately, relatively minor accident a couple of years ago. It was a rear end collision. And I remember I held so tight to the steering wheel, and I didn't even think anything of it because I was more focused on the damage to the rear end of my car.
Right.
But I was kind of rubbing my hand. And ultimately, over the course of days, it actually hurt. Now, fortunately, it did not turn out to be, an ongoing serious problem. But it was astounding to me how significant it was. It actually took several months for it to completely go away. So this is where you do what I say, don't do what I did. Matt said, "Lori, why don't you at least go get an X-ray or something?" So do what I say, not what I did, because you should protect your rights.
Absolutely.
By going to a doctor within that 14-day period, because then if you have a situation I had where nothing really comes of it, you're ultimately fine. Great. We like that. But if it had been an ongoing thing that was, maybe it was a fracture or something like that did not heal up, I would have lost the benefit of my personal injury protection insurance.
Right.
Now, I have health insurance, so I would have been able to handle it in that way. And I still could have brought a claim ultimately if I had ongoing issues, but I would have deprived myself of an important benefit.
Right.
And I would have weakened the evidence in support of a problem.
It does. And that was actually a good point that I was just about to make when it comes to how insurance carriers and defense lawyers approach claims. That's usually one of the first things they'll attack is, they took X amount of days, 10 days, 11 days, 12 days, 2 weeks before they ever saw any medical care and treatment. And usually there's a very reasonable explanation for that. Like you said, I didn't think it was all that serious at first. I was just a little sore. I thought that it would go away and that things would get better, as they sometimes do, but they don't always.
Right.
And so I think Lori gave excellent advice, which you not only to be prudent in protecting the benefits that you pay for in your insurance premiums, but also to preserve and to determine what exactly might be there. It may feel minor.
Right. A doctor can evaluate those kinds of things and monitor it for you. And it, unfortunately, with the insurance companies, they're always looking. So if there's a few days or a couple of weeks, or maybe, this is not uncommon at all. We'll see people come in a month or so. Maybe they didn't go to the doctor for a couple of months.
Right.
Because no one, most people are not actually eager to go to the doctor.
At all.
Right. So
me being one of those people.
Right. So it's totally understandable. And then they look at it as you would in sort of a general way. You'd think, well, I'll deal with this if I need to. Yeah.
Right.
But unfortunately, it's not the best way to approach something, because auto accidents, it's a lot of force. If you were hit in the rear or on the passenger or the driver's side, whatever's involved, and even if there's not a lot of obvious physical damage to the car, it's amazing to me, all the years I've been practicing, that, many times people will be fine, actually can come out of an accident where there was a lot of damage to the car and might be fine. But it can go either way. There's so many variables, because you can have a situation where and I know you have, I definitely have, where people have virtually no damage to the vehicle. And yet they end up with a significant ongoing chronic injury. It might be the proverbial and kind of, the idea of the whiplash injury that is kind of put down and almost mocked. But in reality, if you have sustained that soft tissue injury that is colloquially referred to as a whiplash, that's terrible.
Yeah.
That's absolutely, I mean, there's, the terrible headaches that are associated, muscle spasm. It's an awful injury to have. Right. Yeah. So you really want to be sure to preserve your rights, and also, frankly, again, if there's an ongoing issue, it's really better to hit the ground running with the doctor, because maybe some therapy or something else would be something that could actually help alleviate symptoms and prevent them from becoming more serious. I mean, that's also a possibility.
Absolutely. Absolutely right. That's a great point, because a lot of times people might say, oh, well, look at my car. There's barely anything there. I can't, I'm not going to attribute what I'm feeling to that, that this can't be from this, when it is scientific and medical data to prove that is exactly the opposite, that right. Those kinds of force and impact can be transferred to the body in serious ways.
And you're looking at, it's when you get hit by a vehicle, your vehicle gets hit by another vehicle. I mean, you're talking about, 3,000 to 4,000 pounds, and even more, depending. Maybe you don't want to be hit by one of those cyber trucks, or not to mention a semi or something. But there's a lot of force at work, and so I'm very happy that I don't know what the statistics are, but I'm going to even say maybe most times, because many people go through an accident and thank goodness they're okay. But a very significant number of people, a large number of people, go through accidents and they're not okay.
They're not. Right. Exactly right. So then what happens? What do I do when, sticking with our theme, what do I do when the insurance company calls me before I've even had a chance to see a doctor, like we just talked about?
Well, that's a call to take very carefully. Yeah. Because insurance companies are businesses, and they are looking to minimize and close out claims. So obviously, we would suggest as lawyers that handle personal injury cases that, frankly, it's a very good idea to essentially contact an attorney, decline that call for the moment, and then have that handled through your attorney's office. Because, most times insurance companies are always going to want to take a recorded statement about what occurred and any physical experiences you're having. And that could seem innocuous and like something you could handle on your own. But the problem with it is that the typical individual, unless you're a lawyer handling these kind of cases, is not really going to have an understanding of what the insurance company is trying to accomplish from their, and I'm going to call it a legitimate business posture. They're running their business. They're going to evaluate the claim. They're not in the business of trying to figure out what would be fair for you. That's why you need an attorney who is concerned about that, so it's really best not to talk to the insurance company without legal advice. Because so how many times people, again, just like we were talking about, your inclination is to basically hope and assume you do not have a significant problem, and that, so what'll happen, you're talking about property damage because that's what you're really focused on. And yes, maybe your neck's a little sore, but it's no big deal at the moment. And you're focused on settling up for your car. Exactly. And if they ask you about symptoms and problems you're having, you may minimize them because at the moment they seem to you to be minimal
at that time.
Right. But if they're not minimal a month from then, and now you've all of a sudden you realize now, this has got to be related to that car accident. Well, you've just not understood the context because, and why would you? I mean, it's understandable. That's why it is advisable to get input. And we always recommend, frankly, if you've had an accident of any significance, you really ought to, and see that I use that word significance. That's like legalese. What does that mean?
Yes. What does significance mean?
What does that mean?
It depends.
Right. But I mean, if it's clearly no problem whatsoever, that's one thing. But if there's even the slightest question, like what I relate about my situation with my hand, I actually had a situation that really would have been better to have been evaluated within the 14-day period and monitored, so that would be properly treated, evaluated, and if there was an ongoing problem, then I would not have diminished my ability to show what was going on and related back to that accident.
Exactly right. And so when we're talking about having conversations with the insurance company, oftentimes the adjusters will be throwing out things about coverages and this and this and that. So what do I do when I find out from some way or the other that the other driver doesn't have insurance, or maybe they don't have bodily injury insurance, and the adjuster's throwing these things out there and saying you're going to have to handle your own injury claim because this policy doesn't have bodily injury? And what do I do when I hear that sort of thing?
Well, you pick up the phone, or today you can do it via email and contact an attorney.
Yes.
And, because
texting, there's so many ways to get in touch.
Truly there are today, and which is a great thing because that unfortunately happens more frequently than anyone really would believe. Since the law does not require, when we say liability insurance, we're talking about a type of insurance that basically pays a claim for something their driver caused by negligence. So that's what we mean with liability. So you have liability insurance on your own policy to protect a person if you make a mistake driving and you injure somebody, or just property damage, that your insurance is going to step in, your liability insurance. And likewise, the person that has injured you, we have to hope they have liability insurance, but they're not required to. And therefore, they may not. That is
still a devastating blow for most people when they hear that.
Right. They do not understand that, and then, but many, many times, number one, coming to a lawyer, there may be insurance that, there can be complicated settings where, perhaps there's coverage under a different policy. The other more likely scenario we always look for, obviously, is the uninsured motorist coverage on your own policy, which is designed to protect you in the event that somebody does cause injury to you and they don't have any insurance to stand and compensate you for that. So
that's the whole reason, I would say, behind contacting an attorney, because we're going to know those different little places to look to see what may have been missed. And sometimes, first you look at owner and driver. Are those the same people? If not, those may be two different coverages, two separate policies. Were they driving? Were they in the course and scope of their employment at the time? And then, of course, as Lori brought up, uninsured motorist coverage. That is just the number one thing that I think we try to mention every single show whenever we can, because that, of course, is going to be the main way to insure.
Right. And it's somewhat, no one wants to pay more on their insurance premium. It's typically not huge, but, it could amount to a couple $100 or something, perhaps depending on your situation, what your policy is and all of that. But you don't want to be penny wise and pound foolish.
Absolutely.
And it's very hard. I know I have this conversation with friends all the time, because it's like, you really, if you have health insurance, your medical expenses would be covered, but not the deductibles or copays. I mean, whatever's involved with your insurance. And then there's just a lot of things that can happen that are a part of the unfortunate experience of going through an accident. Obviously, pain and suffering, the impact on your life and your ability to do things,
lost wages,
some being upside down on your car. Like how many times, for the value of your car, it's going to be, basically the fair market value of your car with its age, with its, condition. And that may or may not coincide with what you owe on the car. Or maybe the car, like, please, I was going to say a little prayer, because I love my little Subaru BRZ, but it's now a 9-year-old car, and so I think it would still have some retained value, but in order to duplicate that experience, if I had to go get another car, I'm going to pay a lot more than you would get on that. So those are things that, although the law wouldn't, strictly speaking, necessarily compensate in every way, that uninsured motorist policy actually provides a source of funds that can make you closer to whole. You're never really whole when you go through an accident. It's a terrible experience.
Never. Yeah. And I always fall back to my early cashier training when I worked for a big box store. I'm not going to name their name, but they sold, not appliances, but power tools and things like that. And you could get a warranty. And so every time we're ringing up those big items, it'll ask, do you want a warranty? So we're supposed to ask the customer, would you like the warranty? And as a part of that training, they always said, If they say no, or they have questions about it, you say it's better to have it and not need it than to need it and not have it.
That's a great slogan.
And so that's the way I see uninsured motorist coverage. You don't want to find yourself in a situation where you need it and you didn't have it.
Right.
Because those are going to be much more devastating than a broken power tool. I can tell you that much.
Yes.
But with that being said, there's other things that can come up. When you're talking to insurance companies, you're getting letters from insurance companies. There's all these EOBs and different things coming your way. And you get a letter in the mail. What do I do when I have been sent a letter for an IME evaluation by my own insurance company? And so for those that may not know what IME is, it's an independent medical examination. What do I do when that happens, Lori?
Right. And of course, shocking when your insurance company wants to challenge paying under your insurance policy and for the personal protection.
And you can see it happen very early on.
Yes. Yes. And a lot of times it can happen in any type of medical care. It often will happen with chiropractic care, which can be very helpful to people.
Yes.
But it happens in other settings as well, and other types of medical care. But you get that letter, and the independent part is a little bit hypocritical, I'm going to say, because it's really the insurance company trying to cut off their obligation to pay you benefits. So
is that what it is? Do tell.
So it's not. So I kind of like there's in other settings they'll call it like a compulsory medical exam.
That's
so
really
you
more
accurate. Yeah, you do have to go through it because it's a part of your policy. You agree to it, in the policy. So you go and you're evaluated by a doctor that is being paid by your insurance company with, and it's not that they always say the care doesn't need to go on, but they almost always say the care does not need to go on. So, and so you get into that situation where if they get a report from a doctor saying, you know what, this person is at their maximum medical improvement, there's no reasonable basis for additional medical care. And so then the insurance company that you paid premiums for them to pay 80% up to $10,000, and you may have a medical payments coverage, which takes care of the other 20% up to $2,000 or $5,000 or whatever your policy has. They get to say, we want to close our file. Yeah. And, those things can be challenged. That's something, if that were to happen to you and you did not have an attorney, you would want to consult an attorney. We've handled many of those cases over the years, and there are actually some attorneys that do that exclusively, I think. But it's it absolutely can be challenged, and typically successfully challenged, really, because the insurance company, particularly if you're not represented, they expect they can roll right over you because if a person gets that, a letter in the mail, and then you get a letter saying, well, our doctor examined you. And,
and so such and such doctor has determined that no further care is necessary from this point on. And you're like, what? I'm still in pain. So again, these are the times where you should be picking up the phone and calling an attorney if you haven't by that time. So this next question before we take a short break is a situation where you might assume this person is already represented if something like this happens. But I still wanted to ask this question because I think people out there may be in situations where they have an attorney, but they don't really know, what's going on, or they've gotten some sort of subpoena or notice for deposition, either as themselves, the plaintiff, or as a witness to an accident. And they're like, what does this mean? I just got this notice to appear for my testimony because of this car accident. What does that mean, and what should they expect?
Okay. So are you kind of posing it in the context of a person getting a subpoena for a deposition?
Or notice, because I would say most times if you're a plaintiff, you have an attorney. You receive a copy of the notice that's been scheduled for your deposition. So obviously the way you answer that would be different than someone who maybe witnessed an accident and they're now being subpoenaed. So that could be answered in two different ways.
And there could be, and I would say probably I've had quite a few questions over the years just about in the early stages where maybe there's a notice to appear coming out of the traffic violation.
Yes.
And, a lot of people don't really want to bother, being a participant in that.
They don't want to show up.
Right. And that is, of course, one of the strategies is that if no one shows up, but you are if you're subpoenaed or you receive an official notice, you are actually supposed to go,
should,
obviously. But in other settings, a lot of times you might get a subpoena for deposition as a case is going on. There may be depositions taken of people that were witnesses to the accident, because a lot of times there are disputes as to how the accident occurred, that sort of thing. And usually that will have normally, like you say, I mean, on the plaintiff's side, if it's, you're represented, so we would be, of course, talking to you about that. But many times these witnesses will, they're not going to be represented necessarily. And so you would always be able to talk to whoever subpoenaed you to try to get a little more insight. Normally, in most situations, if you are just a witness, there would be nothing for you to be concerned about. If you're a witness to a traffic accident, you would basically just answer the questions as best you can.
Right.
But I would say that, it would not be uncommon for a witness to call and want to know more about it. And
what is this all about?
Right. and there's nothing wrong doing that.
Yeah. And do I really have to miss work?
Right. Now, I will say this, that in most instances, certainly we would always work around a person's schedule, and most lawyers would. So if you got something like that was a problem, then you should raise it,
Yeah. And so I think a lot of people also don't necessarily realize it's not as formal as, like, you're not going to court. There's not going to be a judge there. But you do have to testify under oath.
Now, especially now, the one and only good thing out of COVID is the convenience that's come from doing everything via Zoom or things like that, because actually it's kind of astounding. But I mean, I've had a couple of live depositions.
It's very rare now. Yeah.
Very rare. And so you have people that are appearing on their phone or on their laptop or whatever.
It almost feels like a little bit of a bullying tactic at times. It's like, oh, I want your client to appear in person.
Yeah.
It's like, why? We have Zoom depositions now.
And it's not been common. I've only had a couple,
very, very rare.
Couple of lawyers that just actually were more like truly old school, and they just like to do it. But I can really only think of about 2 times since then. And it's so it's really mostly now
it's common and acceptable.
Yeah, so
and which I don't mind when it comes to depositions. Mediations, I wish they would go back to.
They work better than I would have thought, but I do think the in-person adds an extra element.
And I'm willing to be the minority on that one, but I prefer in-person mediations.
Yeah, no, I think so. I mean, in terms of the most effective use, and I am adamantly opposed to any idea that you would do trials via Zoom. And we have not seen that in our practice. There's a lot of discussion about it, and I can easily see it being something that would be pushed as time goes on, but I really do not think that would be helpful at all.
I agree.
Yeah.
Very too many different challenges and things that I feel like can go on with juries, and
it's just different, even like with
presenting the evidence and
even like what you were saying with the mediation. I mean, there's a personal connection if you're in a room together, basically and obviously with a jury, the jury is seeing people live and in person, because even though the video works better than I would have thought, it's still not the same thing.
Just body language, inflections in your voice, the way, we're trained to move around the courtroom. You're constrained to this camera in front of you. So I would never be on board for that.
Yeah.
But like you said, we never know how we will move in terms of going in that direction in the future. Yeah. So that's a good time for a short commercial break. Hopefully you have been learning a lot about what do you do after certain personal injury situations. We've been talking all about car accidents, but we're going to get into slip and falls, premise liability claims next. After this short break, you're listening to FLA Law live on the radio.
This is the Tan Talk Radio Network.
After a car accident, there are many questions that you need answers to. Who pays for my car repairs? Who pays for the medical bills? What about my lost wages? And more. The personal injury law firm of Perenich, Caulfield, Avril, and Noyes has been answering these questions for their clients for nearly 70 years. Since 1955, they've been a voice of the injured in the legal system. As one of the longest established law firms in Tampa Bay, Perenich, Caulfield, Avril, and Noyes is here to answer your questions. Listen to their live call-in radio show on this channel every Tuesday evening from 5 to 6 p.m. or call them at 727-796-8282 or visit them at voiceoftheinjured.com. Offices Clearwater, non-attorney spokesperson.
This is the Tam Talk Radio Network.
We did have to do some of that, but not that much.
We were talking off the air about doing push-ups and pull-ups.
All right.
That's something that I don't know if it's just from women or not. I think upper body strength is just nothing that I've ever been able to conquer. And I think I remember saying somewhere that I think men just happen to be they
are definitely stronger. And I'm sure it's a good idea to do that. It's just that it's hard. I don't want to do it.
It's very, very hard. Yeah, but okay. So that's what we were talking about on the commercial break. Hopefully you have been tuned in and you were listening since the beginning. But if not, I have Lori Robinson. She is our board certified civil trial lawyer at Perenich, Caulfield, Avril, and Noyes. And she's been with us on the show talking about personal injury topics. And our theme tonight is, what do I do when? And so we've been getting into different scenarios that people encounter frequently when it comes to the various injury claims. And so, of course, the lines are still open. If you have a question, comment, and want to chime in on the conversation, the number to call is 727-441-3000. Of course, we are also streaming live still on Facebook and YouTube. And so that's a way for you to drop your comment in the comment section, and we'll read that out over the air live with Lori and I. And we will get right back into it, talking about slip and falls, or otherwise known as premises liability cases that can be slip and fall, trip and fall, and those types of injury claims. And this is another area where I think a lot of people can sometimes get confused or just misunderstand the law when it comes to these types of claims. And so let's get right into it. What do I do when I have a slip and fall at a store or business? I'm embarrassed and I just want to leave.
Right. And that would be the normal reaction. But that's a particular type of scenario where you actually could end up with more of an ongoing chronic issue.
Oh, yeah.
So many times people end up, with a knee problem that ends up needing surgery or a back issue and that kind of thing. And they're very difficult cases to hold the store responsible. So first order of business, you've got to report it. You've got to report the incident. You want that on record that it occurred, so that that can't be questioned later on. And that's so important. And I think people do have a reluctance to, because you do feel embarrassed potentially and all that. And the whole area of slip and falls, the laws become very challenging because they've kind of created circumstances where it's always been true that you could weigh the comparative responsibility of the store, I'm using store, but the business, whatever, and the person. Yeah. But now the law changed a couple of years ago to actually create a situation if a jury thought that the person who slipped and fell was more than 50% responsible, then that would eliminate all responsibility on the part of the store, even if the store had significant responsibility. But all of that stuff is kind of inside baseball. You should not be thinking about that yourself. If you had something occur, it should be, you notify the store or the business and obviously get medical attention, very important to get medical attention, and then consult an attorney about the circumstances, because it can just depend. Now, I couldn't help but think, when you're announcing this topic, one thing that's very different in Europe, we have a lot of protections here and because Europe, they're all old, but I think about the little hotel.
I recently traveled there.
Yeah. Then the little hotel, I thought it was very cool. It was like 400 years old, and they had this spiral staircase that, oh my goodness. I'm sure that the requirements that we have regarding, the size of steps, how deep they are, and all of these things.
The codes and various statutes.
Oh yeah. We have a lot of things like that, and people can be unhappy about a lot of the regulations that we have, and there can be arguments perhaps both ways. But there are lots of situations that something occurs that really, if the premise, the business or store owner had simply basically been more attentive, it could have been prevented. We had Matt and I just recently, this was so common, it was in a parking lot, potholes all over the place.
Oh yeah, we see that quite
all
often
the time.
Mm-hmm.
And yes, it's a problem for the business, but it's also so foreseeable that a person's going to have issues. And in this particular case, it happens. The client trips in one of these holes. It's kind of dark, so it wasn't particularly well lit. And, and it was totally avoidable. And that's a very, very common scenario the law does, and it's going to be negligence, though. And that, I think, one of the most common issues that we deal with is people may sustain a very significant injury, but it's not at all clear, that the premise actually did anything. It just happened there, and people have a tendency to think, well, it was on their property. But
that is exactly what I think most people feel. Well, I won't say most, but a good amount of people just think, I was hurt, and it's your property that you're responsible for.
Right.
Therefore, I must have a claim.
Right. And, it's just, there does have to be negligence, and so the typical thing we get into is you're in a store, a grocery store, or any other type of store, and maybe there's some, water or some substance on the floor. You slip and fall and hurt yourself. And that is particularly where people say, well, it's their property. Well, we have to be able to prove that the store was actually negligent, that they did not act with reasonable care. And so that means we got to be able to show that if there's a substance on the floor, it was there long enough. And that's a debatable point.
Yes.
What's long enough? But it has to be there long enough so that they really should have been able to do something about it, or perhaps they created conditions that actually caused it. So again, you don't need to try to figure this out on your own. The law.
You actually anticipated the question that I added to my list is, what do you do when, let's say, you did report it,
right?
And you're doing the steps, and I fell. I'm not going to just walk out. I'm going to report this. I'm going to take photos, and then you speak to this person, and they say, "Well, we didn't know it was like that."
Right.
Then what do you do?
Yeah. And there's nothing you're going to be able to do on your own. We had. I'm trying to think of the very lovely lady that called me some years ago that somehow I ended up talking to. I guess it was probably came through our intake, but she was at a store and she tried to handle all this on her own.
So difficult.
And it was like, it was like one of those big stores, and she had slipped on some substance and she thought it was very straightforward. Well, of course, it's not very straightforward at all, and so you're not going to be there's not going to be a circumstance where a store is going to, or a premise is going to just readily respond to you. Now, some will have a type of insurance called medical payments coverage that it would pay for your medical bills regardless of fault, up to a certain amount. And some of them will have that, maybe $5,000 coverage, occasionally 10. But, and if that's there, you might possibly be able to get some bills paid.
Right.
But if you have something that requires medical attention, that means something significant happened, and you really need to involve an attorney on that, so that you really do have your rights preserved, and you get what you should get as a result of something that's occurred, which starts with an evaluation. So you got to have that notification, and then you really need to be talking with an attorney, preferably close in time to when the event happened, because we would often want to do some investigation, because these things do have to be, the negligence has to be proven. And if you let too much time go by, then things may change or may be harder to actually investigate.
And so could you give an example then of what you're looking for when someone, or business owner, or a landlord, grocery store, their position is, we didn't know it was like that, or we didn't have notice, which is the legal term. How do you approach that from the plaintiff perspective? That
is where the investigation kicks in. So, fairly recent case that I can think of, and it's very common to have to file a lawsuit in these cases. You know, many cases,
even more so now than ever.
Yeah. So many cases where you have a personal injury, it's possible to settle the claim without having to go all the way to a lawsuit. And it is sometimes possible with a premise case, but not too often, because the law is kind of stacked in favor. The deck is kind of stacked a little bit in favor of the premise, but you take depositions. Like grocery stores are common places for such things to occur, and you're looking for video footage that they often have, and you're looking to find witnesses that you can interview or depose. You know, basically to try to develop what has happened, what actually caused the particular substance to be on the floor, and then, you know, very often, probably one of the cases that was the toughest I've had over the years, that Matt and I had quite a few years ago, and it was in federal court because I think it was a Walmart. So they removed the case to federal court, which is always a much more complicated situation. So. But
it certainly was Walmart's MO at one point. I don't know.
I don't know if there's so much. I haven't had a case in a while where we had to file suit against them. But in this particular case, the person fell due to a substance on the floor. They did have surveillance, and the surveillance actually showed the substance that was on the floor, and it showed somebody like spilling it or something like. And it was like literally it was 2 minutes later that our client walked across and slipped and had pretty significant injuries. So very, very tough case. But it led to a successful resolution.
In that 2 minute increments, how many Walmart employees?
Exactly, that was it. And so, you know, now they're the employees, and they will always say that a part of their policy is you're always supposed to be looking. Well, of course, people are not always looking.
They're
right.
Not,
and they walk right by. And if they had.
And there's even some other stores, and there may be confidentiality, so I won't say which ones. But they even tell them to carry paper towels and things in their pockets, because that's how important it is for them to be looking for these things and cleaning them up and making sure the floors are dry.
Right.
So that's, like you said, that's the key, is making sure that, you know, you have an attorney who's going to be looking for the depositions and know the people to take and get the testimony and preserving the video and those sorts of things. So that's why these are the kinds of cases that are very difficult to try to handle on your own.
There'd be no possibility really in something like that, you know, and understanding, you know, the overall issues that are involved. So it's definitely, those are complicated cases.
Very much so.
Tough to fight, but they can be fought, and they can be successfully fought.
So I have another difficult question for you then. So we've now addressed the hurdle of, what do I do when they are telling me that they didn't know it was like that? But what do you do when you're not really sure what caused you to fall? You have a slip and fall, trip and fall, you go down, you're hurt, but you don't really know what exactly made you fall. And
this would be one of the more common scenarios we have to deal with. Because it starts with, we're going to have to ultimately be able to show that there was something negligent.
There has to be a hazardous condition.
Yeah, there's got to be a hazardous condition. And so you may not know, but if you know that you did slip, that this was not a stumbling or tripping over your feet, you slipped on something, then, obviously when you handle these kind of cases over a number of years, there are different scenarios. It may be the cleaning, the maintenance of the floors, waxing or not waxing, stripping or not stripping. I mean, there'd be a lot of things, and we will get involved in getting maintenance records for floors and that kind of thing. In fact, there's a lot of things that happen in the course of trying to maintain a property that there are records about, and that may explain. But if in the long run we cannot actually show what you fell on or slipped on, and that it had something to do with the property owner, then that's not going to be a successful case. But I would have to say, most times we are able to kind of get an idea of what happened, but there are times when you
piece
can't,
it together after you pull the evidence together. And there's even cases where at first take you might not really see the case.
Right.
You might not see it either. And someone says, I'm not really sure what caused us to fall, what caused me to fall. And they show you the photo of where they fell. And you're like, I don't really know. But I've seen situations where expert opinion is sometimes, necessary, because even if you think about like the lines that are painted in a parking lot, you have these, yellow lines, white lines, and sometimes they're freshly painted. And sometimes when those lines get wet, it causes a slipping hazard.
Right.
And so just looking at the photo, you might think, well, there's no broken potholes, there's no puddles of oil or anything that might be considered slippery, until you realize that you can do testing with coefficient friction testing,
coefficient,
and these areas sometimes in crosswalks and various places can get very slippery on those painted lines. And so I've been in many seminars and scenarios where they've had experts discuss how those kinds of cases can be often overlooked, because people don't necessarily realize that once it rains or it gets wet and you step from the asphalt to that painted area and you go down, that is, an issue that should have been tested. And that could have been aware of, because I think on one of the seminars I attended, they had the camera footage for several hours, and you see people kind of losing their bearing and slipping the whole time. It was just happening back to back to back. And so you can't really allege as much that you didn't know,
Right.
And everybody's coming in having this kind of.
That's
slipping,
right. And that's the kind of thing where you need to not censor yourself, because you think, I don't really know what happened. But so that's why I was emphasizing the importance. Like, there's a difference between you stumble over your own feet. Okay.
Right.
Which certainly we do this, but if you actually slipped, it was slippery, there was slicks,
you noticed something
happened that caused you to fall. That's something to take to an expert, to a lawyer that handles these cases, because the establishments, they are responsible for providing a safe environment. And so having knowledge about, the surface textures and that sort of thing. And when you see yellow lines places, that's because, and people say, well, it's because of all those lawyers. Well, but actually when you see a yellow line drawing your attention to something, it's because it's not safe. Your attention needs to be drawn to it, but it does also, you don't want to add an additional hazard of it being slick that somebody will slip on it, So
right.
Yeah, they're complicated situations, but
they
if you have
challenging cases.
Significant injury, it is something that you definitely should be reviewing, because you don't want to go through your whole life saying, that just didn't seem right, basically.
Exactly right. And that's always my fall back on. If you are in pain and you're hurting and you're seeking treatment, don't just let it go. Allow us to investigate. And so that brings us to the conclusion of our What Do I Do When show tonight. And of course, Laura, you did an excellent job answering those questions. Hopefully our listeners got something from our show tonight and has learned something valuable that they can remember if they're ever involved in a car accident or a trip and fall. And of course, I always say, I hope you never do. And I hope you never need us. But if you do, we are the law firm of Perenich, Caulfield, Avril, Noyes. You can reach us at 727-796-8282 or at voiceoftheinjured.com or usalaw.com. We hope you join us again next Tuesday. We are here every Tuesday at 5 p.m. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next week with FLA Law live on the radio. Good night, Lori.
Good night.